Test, test, test. Good morning, everybody. It is just after 10:30 a.m. on a Sunday, which means it is time for another live stream as part of Sundae Club. We are so it's 10:32 a.m. We're so close to starting on time. I genuinely thought the Streamlabs was going to work perfectly this morning, and it didn't. I had the same issue where I basically have to remove my microphone completely from the settings and then restart it for some reason I cannot fathom. But that doesn't matter. So if this is the first stream you are watching, what is Sundae Club? Every week we live stream some Ruby on Rails, and we are building an app together, and we kind of look at how we build the app from kind of all the options that we have. Hopefully this will help people out that are looking to learn Ruby on Rails or are looking at specific tools or gems or anything like that, just from someone who works with it in my day job, and I'm interested in a lot of the new stuff that's going on, and building an app together is a good way to kind of play around, and nothing too formal or serious or anything like that. So last week we moved back to the kind of user interface of our app, having spent a little while in like users and authentication and permissions and all that stuff. Go back in the channel. You can find all of those videos there and see everything that you need in those previous videos. And then last week we kind of moved back to the front end because we had some functionality, we had some tests for it, everything was going great in our Rails app, and we then wanted it to look cool. And I had installed Tailwind CSS because I was interested in what it was doing and as a project, and we kind of used that a little bit last week, so we got our heads around more what Tailwind CSS is. And we also spoke about, which I also want to come back to today, is the kind of options that we have around the front end. So this idea of we use Tailwind and we haven't installed React or Vue or any of the other myriad of front-end frameworks that we could use. And we just kind of did some vanilla CSS-y stuff. And it was interesting, actually, really good looking at Tailwind and how it's a different approach to one I'm used to. And we're going to carry on with that as we go. But one of the things I mentioned last week, and which has cropped up again during the week with things I was listening to, is ViewComponent. And this idea of there being a Rails way of handling some of the UI stuff that's currently being done by, I think, other frameworks. And I haven't delved too deep into it, so I thought this week's stream could be a really good time. I did mention that I was interested in looking at it last week, but I thought that it would be a good chance to get started. So let's do a little bit of follow-up before we start. So I'm just let's jump over to take a look at the coding stream. And while I do that, I'm gonna check the audio on the stream really quickly just to make sure. Yep, I can hear my voice, that's good. So we have set up GitHub Actions and put the site live, sort of, in some previous streams. And that was really exciting because we had tests running and we could get the site live at URL. Last week, I think I had some follow-up from that, so which is how we then got the GitHub Actions completed and working. So we went through the follow-up, looked at, I think we'd missed a couple of steps from that initial stream that I had done during the week. Well, this morning actually, I was tidying up. If you remember, there's a homework edition stream in the channel where we've got this big long work in progress branch, and I was gradually kind of chopping it up into pull requests and merging them. So I have done a couple more maybe one more this morning. Stupid thing. So you'll see, here we go, merge an hour ago, I did one more this morning, and then I've got another PR up. And if you remember, what we had done in that homework edition was basically gone and looked at the huge work in progress branch that we had, just because for each stream had just been smashing through the commits and just putting them in no particular organization or written up or anything. And so this was going through finding the rough groupings of work that were there, and seeing if we could condense those down into pull requests and get them onto master and get them out of that big work in progress branch. So you'll see that I did one this morning, which is where we had installed Devise. And what I've done is actually put links to the live streams in the pull requests. So if you are a learner coming to these videos later, and you're interested and you're watching something and you're like, oh, I wonder how this got into master, you can kind of then see these kind of tidied up commits. Each one has a little comment on relevant stuff, and there's a little comment on the PR as well as a link to the video. So I'll try and do some more of those because I just want to get that out of the way, because in reality I would rather do this as part of the post-stream tidy up stuff that I'm kind of making a list of stuff to do. So why am I mentioning this? Well, it's because it shows that our tests work. So if you remember, we did a stream ages ago around adding Pundit, which is authorization for our app, so that as we go into the control panel, only certain users can do that, can implement that. And during the stream, we actually added the functionality, but we didn't write any tests for it. We wrote those in a later stream. So we've actually got two separate, we added some authorization just to check that it worked. We tested it in the user interface and it did what we wanted it to do. And then in a later stream, we found out that it broke a bunch of tests, which are then fixed in later commits, like much later, 10 to 15 commits later. And now that we have the tests running on the pull requests, we're able to say, okay, this shouldn't go into master. We really want to keep that generally clear. So it's a case of saying, hey, these failed, and they failed because the commit, we don't have the helpers that we need even in the setup for the controller tests to get Devise or working. So that all got fixed in later commits. But what we want to do now, I'm not going to do it on this stream, I'll do it either offline or maybe I'll do it in a homework edition, but probably offline, is basically just grab that work back out of the commits where it's done there and just rebase it back to now. There are two rebasing, if you're interested in how we rebase those commits, there are two rebase homework editions already in the video feed, so you can go back and take a look at those. And we want to get this passing before it goes in. So we went back through our history and grouped the work together, and now we're able to go back and do that rebase to make sure that each one is actually, it makes sense. There might be stuff down here. Can this go back when we added Devise? So that's the actual failure we're getting here, and there are a couple more here. This group of work is all the stuff that needs to come back up and get sprinkled throughout these commits. These are the oldest. This is the initial work we did, and then this was the latest stuff. So that's a great example of that work. I just wanted to show that working and the value that you get out of having your tests running on each pull request, which I think is really important. Cool. So I think that's it for follow-up. Oh no, one other piece of follow-up was that we fixed the domain. So the other issue we had is that the domain name wouldn't resolve, and I think we should. Okay, yep, great. So it doesn't work, but that does now. So it doesn't work because of an issue on the app itself, but the domain name does resolve. And I think we had maybe Safari is the browser I'm looking for here. Grab a Safari tab over, and I think we had, can't see the address bar, it's run off the top of the screen, not sure what's happening there. Oh, I've just realized, oh damn it, I've just realized I'm not showing my screen, apologies for that. But there was nothing on there, you could just see, well I'll show you again, you can just see the test failing on this pull request, but you probably know what that looks like. So let's bring Safari back up, and SundayClub.co does fail, which is annoying because there's an issue there, but that's fine. And I think, yes, excellent. So there's something wrong with the homepage one, I can't remember. I think it relies on a channel being present or something that we don't have. Which is fine, that's just dummy. But if you look, this is real channel, and we can go in and edit it, and that's all up and running at the correct domain name. And I think think it works with the www dots. Yeah. So I think that was the issue we were running into. I think it worked without last week and then didn't work this week. So I'll get the homepage fixed up and we'll get some authorization and stuff running over that. And we can actually start to build a real app, which is very, very cool. So let's take a look at what we want to do today. So if you remember, let's fire up our app here. Let's get a server up and running. Just bring up terminal. Cool. Just bump the font size up a little bit. And we just want a server. Do we have to specify? Okay, that's cool. Oops. Oh, is that because I'm not on the right branch? I'm just checking. Yep, I'm way, I'm way back because I was doing those rebases this morning. So let me just jump. I have a new branch called current WIP, which is current work in progress. And so we should be nice and tidy moving forward. So let's see if it will run our server now. Yes, cool. I hope. Let's then swap this out for local host 3000. Still waiting to start. Great. Okay, cool. And oh, that's why the homepage one is failing as well, because we haven't actually put a home. We haven't actually got the commit where homepage happens. Where we add a homepage onto master yet. So as soon as that goes up, we'll be able to visit sundaeclub.co. Okay, so we can make a site locally. And yeah, amazing. So this actually looks better than I remembered. So this is, we added the forms helper to the new Tailwind CSS kind of version 2. So we installed version 2 of Tailwind. We added their forms plugin, I guess it is, and we got that working. And so you can see we also added this grey background and added all of this stuff in. So let's take a look. That was from last week. So we should be able to go into, it will be part of the site setup. And that's the details step. Yep, and what we also looked at last week, which was really cool, was those kind of drag and drop, the kind of drag and drop UI that you get from Tailwind, which is really pretty amazing actually. It's gave us like that whole header section. It's worth a look. Dropping back to last week, and we just picked this section up to take a look at. So what I wanted to look at is not quite the formatting of that behavior but more the actual how we're going to build it. And what I wanted to look at is the oh, is it? No, view controller. Okay, maybe I just. Is that not what it's called? What is it called? It's called ViewComponent. Come on, Max. That was ViewComponent. Cool. So I'm interested in this, a framework for building reusable, testable, and encapsulated view components in Ruby on Rails. That sounds great. So let's accept these cookies. This over to the left. Okay, so there's not a lot in the actual README, so obviously it wants to send you over to this other page for the documentation. ViewComponent is designed to integrate as seamlessly as possible with Rails with the least surprise. That sounds good to me. So this is why I wanted to take a look. It's supported natively in Rails 6.1 and compatible with 5.0 via an included monkey patch. Okay, what are we on here? Because we can just update because we're not really using. So we're on 6.03 and we can just update our Rails because we don't really have a huge amount of functionality or anything yet. So we can update if that's a requirement. So installation, what is the monkey patch out of curiosity? Oh, it's very small. It just... Module view component, module render monkey. Okay, and so that obviously then needs to get added somewhere, so that render... okay, not really sure. That doesn't seem to tell me a lot, but I presume that's somewhere else. Okay, so tested with compatibility with Rails combination of Ruby 2.4, so that's all good. And then we can just install it doing that. Okay, so here's where we really want to get interested. What are components? View components are Ruby objects that output HTML. Think of them as an evolution of the presenter pattern inspired by React. So I don't think we have any presenters yet. We haven't bumped into the presenter pattern in the Sundae Club app yet, nor are we looking to use React on this project. So if you haven't come across both of those, potentially they might be a bit of prerequisites for following along with this one. They're things that I use regularly, so I'm going to carry on. But they're both pretty deep, especially React. But they are interesting ways of thinking about the front end. The presenter pattern is kind of how data is presented for the front end, and React is a JavaScript framework, front end framework, because it's on the server side. JavaScript framework that is a component based way of. Oh God, how do you even describe React? A component based way of thinking about the way that interfaces are built and how data flows through them. So I'm gonna butcher a description where essentially you would have components that are nested within them, and then data props kind of can be passed to each individual component and then optionally cascade down them. Whereas normally you would just have simply like, here's a page, here's all the things on that page. This treats each individual as nested and isolated, so that each individual component only needs to know the thing it needs to know. And it also handles state. And state is around how are we going to deal with the current state of data here? So often in a fancy front-end framework, you might have the user interacting with things, and they might click a button and it changes the state. So, or even just an option in a form, a radio button, for example, and they change the state of what's happening. And rather than relying on the browser for handling any of that, React handles it itself and says, I'm gonna track the state and I'm gonna handle it and have that state flow through these nested components. And there are a whole myriad of ways of dealing with that as well. And if you're a learner and you're new to all of these things, it can add such a massive amount of complexity. So why am I looking at ViewComponent? Well, it does add a huge amount of complexity, but there are reasons these frameworks exist. They are trying to solve a problem that so many projects bump into. So they are worth a little bit of time, and also you do want to handle things like, how am I going to make sure that things are the same across my entire app? So they look the same, they behave the same, and components are a way of saying, okay, well, I have a series of buttons here, maybe 3 or 4 buttons in a row. It might be a bad example, or a series of form elements or something like that. And I always want them to behave the same way, whether I put them on the homepage or whether I put them deeply nested inside a user account. I want them to both be the same and behave the same. And so a component is a way of describing bits of the view that can do the same thing. And if you're a learner for Rails, partials are often the kind of solution that you would bump into first for that. So we go, okay, we're going to make this a partial, and we are going to reuse that partial in several different places. So then you're like, well, they are going to be the same because I've used the same partial. But the partial often can only describe the actual elements, and then you then want to describe sometimes like the behavior or output of them, or have them change differently depending on what happens, and have that happen based on something like a callback to the server or user interaction. And then you need to start getting involved with JavaScript and things like that. So partials are the initial bump into this, how do I keep things the same? And then things like React, ViewComponent and things like that are taking that a step further. So I'm hoping I've described that even vaguely usefully, but this is why these things exist and why you may want to either completely ignore them depending on where you are in your learner journey, or you might have bumped into some of these problems working with partials already and be like, okay, let's see what these things are doing. So that's a bit of background from my perspective. Again, I may have butchered a lot of those descriptions. Let's keep going. Okay, so the next thing, when should I use components, essentially sums up everything I just said, but in like one very brief terse sentence, which is a million times better than what I just said. Components are most effective in cases where view code is reused or benefits from being tested directly. Like that's my 5-minute ramble, but in a sentence. Cool. So I didn't even mention testing because that's a whole other thing. So unlike traditional Rails views, View components can be unit tested. In the GitHub codebase, components unit tests take around 25 milliseconds each, compared to 6 seconds for controller tests. Okay. Rails views are typically tested with slow integration tests that also exercise the routing and controller layers in addition to the view. This cost often discourages thorough test coverage. With View component, integration tests can be reserved for end-to-end assertions, with permutations and corner cases covered at the unit level. That sounds great. I like that. Data flow. Okay, so data flow is what was part of my ramble about how data makes its way through the UI. Traditional Rails views have an implicit interface, making it hard to reason about what information is needed to render, leading to subtle bugs when rendering the same view in different contexts. View components use a standard Ruby initializer that defines clearly what is needed to render, making them easier and safer to reuse than partials. Also sounds great. Based on our benchmarks, View components are roughly 10 times or approximately 10 times faster than partials. So partials, again, is what I mentioned earlier that as a learner you may have bumped into. Views often fail basic Ruby code quality standards, long methods, deep conditional nesting, and mystery guests abound. View components are Ruby objects, making it easy to follow and enforce code quality standards. This is all sounding great. This is right up my alley so far. Building events, conventions. Components are subclasses of View component base. We have looked at subclasses with a base in earlier streams when we were doing our user permissions stuff. We had our control panel base, and that's a pattern you bump into a lot in Rails. They live in app-components, app/components. It's common practice to create and inherit from an application component that is a subclass of View component base. Okay. Fine, so that's again another common Rails pattern. You would have had application model, application controller, which probably inherit from action controller base, active controller base. Action controller base. There you go. Never going to remember that. Component names end in component. Component module names are plural, as for controllers and jobs. So this is setting out all of the standards that you are going to be following, and Rails often has very strong naming standards. So that's good. That's a very Railsy way. If you tell me the standards up front, and I'll just blindly follow them. And again, I already blindly follow things like controllers and jobs naming standards. So if you tell me it's the same, I'm like, oh, okay, I already understand that. Name components for what they render, not what they accept. Avatar component instead of user component. Okay. So it's got a generator. We love those when we're doing these live streams because they save us a bunch of time. The generator accepts the component name and a list of arguments. View component includes template generators for the ERB, Hamel, and Slim template engines, and will default to the template engine specified in template. Okay. The template engine can also be passed in as an option. So we're using ERB. Let's stick with ERB. ViewComponent is a Ruby file and corresponding template file with the same base name. A ViewComponent is a Ruby file and corresponding template file with the same base name. So app components. Oh, okay, you get both. Right, okay, that's okay, so you get both. I thought that this might actually be more like a presenter actually outputting HTML that was just treated. Okay, so this is something like your presenter, right? So it's telling it what to do, and so then it is setting an instance variable in the view component. And I'm assuming that is then magically passed through in the same way that the instance variables in a controller are passed to the views. I'm assuming here, I haven't read any further, that the instance variables from within a component will be passed through to the corresponding component template. Okay, cool. Rendered in a view as... Okay, so then in your actual view, you get... You render it and you pass it as you just create a new instance of the component and you pass in the argument. And then... Content is obviously what is yielding the rest of the block. Can you do multiples of it? Okay, interesting. Okay, yeah, this is my next content area. Sounds like it's going to answer that. So here you would get span title, my title, hello world, because my title is the content in here and it's the bit that was passed in there. Okay, cool. Content passed to a view component as a block is captured and assigned to the content accessor. View components can declare additional content areas. For example, header and body with content areas. So yep, you can have multiple with content areas, assigns multiple, and then you can just assign them like that. And then, okay, here's how that is rendered. That all makes sense. Hope you're following along. So again, we've got our three things: the component itself, the component template, and then where it is rendered in a view. So those are the three things I think we're always going to be caring about, I assume. And so this component says, hey, there are two content areas. There are two things around which, or into which, is it into which or around which they put content? No, around which they put content because it's just spat out amongst it. Okay, fine. Yeah. Slots, experimental. Okay. Experimental doesn't seem like great to live stream, but okay. Slots are currently under development as a successor to content areas. Okay. So rather than a content area, call it a slot. Fine. The slot API should be considered unfinished and subject to breaking changes in non-major releases of view component. Slots enable multiple blocks of content to be passed to a single view component, reducing the need for subcomponents, e.g. modal header, modal body, blah, blah, blah. Okay. By default, slots can be rendered once per component. They provide an accessor with the name of the slot, header, that returns an instance of view component slot. Okay, already losing me slightly, but let's just keep going. Slots declared with collection true can be rendered multiple times. They provide an accessor with the pluralized name of the slot, rows, which is an array of slot instances. Learn more about the design of slots, see 348.352. Okay. Slots are defined by with slot and with slot header, so I'm assuming that replaces the with content areas. To define a slot with a custom Ruby class plus class name. Okay. Slot classes must be subclasses of view component slot. Okay. So let's take a look at what this looks like. Okay, so they've gone for much more complex examples here. So this is our box component. Includes slottable, and this has 3 slots. So again, this is replacing all of the stuff we looked at earlier with the content areas. So it's got 3 slots: header, body, header, and row. Oh, sorry, body and footer, header that has a specific class name, and row that is a collection of rows And that also has a class name that's assigned in. Okay, so then you are going to pass into the view component right, we're then defining the okay. So we're defining those. Why aren't we defining footer? Or am I just missing that? Okay. Or body. Do we not care about those? Let's come to those later. So, oh, it's because these ones have specific, right. That's just using the default one. These are actually being passed in, specifying. So saying, hey, class name header. We're defining those here in line. So this is a header which inherits from ViewComponent slot. That takes in also classes, and it, when you're spitting those classes out, it puts them around box dash header. Okay. Are these just formatting class names? Yeah, I think they are. Okay, so row is the same. Right, but here we're able to initialize with a theme. Okay, so this is presumably where we get some of the value of this. You can say, okay, it could pass in a theme and have each of the individual slots know what to do. Then it gives you the correct theme class name. So pass in a theme. If it's gray, do it that. Okay, fine. And here is then the component template. It's a box. If header, which is the slot name, then do this. If body, do this. If rows.any, do this. And if footer, do this. And here we know that it can then do rows.each. And then for each row, it spits out the content. And so I'm assuming .content just comes from the slot. I think it's mentioned content until now. Okay. And then here, render box component new, do component component.slot header. This is my header, component.slot. Okay, so right, and then this is the content. What's this box row? Theme yellow row. Okay, I'm kind of vaguely following along with that, but yeah, okay. Inline components, view components can render without a template file by defining a call method. Okay, fair enough. It is also possible to define methods for variants and render them with variant. Inline render new with variant phone. Inline variant components are call phone. Oh wow, okay, so that appends. Cool, so loads of metaprogram going on there. So they're presumably looking for call that's suffixed with variant, then that through to call. Okay, link to phone. Okay, template inheritance components that subclass another component inherit the parent's component template if they don't define their own template. If my link component HTML.me is not defined, the component will fall back to link components template. Sidecar assets. View components support two options for defining view files. The simplest option is to place the view next to the Ruby component. Sidecar directory. As an alternative, views and other assets can be placed in a sidecar directory with the same name as the component that can be useful for organizing views alongside other assets like JavaScript and CSS. That's example component. Right, okay, so that's something I'm familiar with from more, this is more React-y, where you would have the .jsx or tsx, and then the .test.jsx or .tsx, and also maybe the .modules.scss. So you'd have them all, and then Webpack would go back and build them all together. Okay, to generate a component with a sidecar directory, use this, and what's the first option? App components, test component. Yeah, I actually would like this, the directory thing. It doesn't bother me that things get super nested. I'd rather just have lots of small things, because if you just looking at this, the quantity that you're going to end up with is potentially huge. Component file inside sidecar directory. So it's also possible to place the Ruby component file inside the sidecar directory. Oh, I see. So is that, yeah, I would run it that way. so that you had the name of it and then everything inside. Inside the circuit grouping or related folder. Note, avoid giving your container folder the same name as your .rb file. This would be a conflict. Okay, yeah. That's where Ruby comes unstuck. Ugh, okay. Right, that's why they do example component and example. I suppose they'll always be next to each other. The component can then be rendered using the folder name as a namespace. Right, so you could group them in this mechanism and just namespace them that way. Okay, so it's very Railsy so far. Conditional rendering. Components can implement a render method to be called after initialization to determine if the component should render. Traditionally, so this is React. That's what React does. I don't, not necessarily with a determining if, because there would be lifecycle hooks within lifecycle. It's parts of the lifecycle of a React component. I think one is called component should render or something like that. Traditionally, the logic for whether to render a view could go in either the component template, if user requires confirmation, or a view that renders the component. Yep, okay. I would normally put it inside the component template. Using the render hook simplifies the view. Confirm email component. Okay. That's what we could do. We could do something where we do like a call to action for the homepage, and look at showing like a login form or a link to the login form or something if they're not logged in, and if they are logged in, just show a button to go to their account or something. Please confirm your email address is another example. Okay, cool. To assert the component has not been rendered, use refute component rendered. Okay, so here we get into the life cycle of the component aspect. So before render, that's very helpful in terms of Rails, very Railsy. Okay. Rendering collections, with collection, yeah, we took a look at that above with the row stuff. I'm gonna move on quite quickly. There's a load of this. I don't really know how much we need to get into the details of these. So test is probably worth looking at. Unit test components directly using the render inline test helper, asserting against the rendered output. Capybara matches are available if the gem is installed. So render inline this with these props. Again, they're not props in in this land. They would just be values for the keyword arguments. And then a set selector that is mini tests, but presumably with RSpec you could do the same thing. And just say expect to have selector, I would guess. Okay. There's a lot to take in here, probably more than I realized. It would be really good before we jump into this. Oh, now this I like. So it's got a preview component. In the same way we can preview mailers in Rails, it's got a preview components. This would be for React, the kind of equivalent of Storybook, I'm guessing, which sounds really interesting. Okay, so this is a Ruby version. Yeah, it's just like a... Yeah, I'm loving all of that. And then RSpec at the bottom. They have stuff for RSpec, which is fair enough. There's a note about the monkey patch, which we mentioned earlier. Right, it is possible to include JavaScript and CSS alongside components, sometimes called sidecar assets or files. Use the Webpacker gem to compile sidecar assets. Okay, that's interesting. Don't really need to know a lot about it at this point, but I'm interested in using Stimulus.js as well, so it'd be cool if you could get like the component and then the stimulus controller or something like that in there. Ah, that's exactly what they're doing here. That seems really interesting. Okay, known issues. Form 4 compatibility. ViewComponent is not currently compatible with Form 4 helpers. Okay, cool. So we're using our form helpers so far. And okay, I'm not quite sure. Oh, it's actually putting the helpers in the component doesn't work. I see. But you could... Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, I wonder how people get around that. That's kind of where I was just getting to. So isn't this just like X library? ViewComponent is far from a novel idea. Popular implementation of ViewComponent is from Ruby, included but not limited to Trailblazer/cells, I've heard of. Drive View, which I'm not aware of. Component, which I'm not aware of, and Active Arbor. I've used ActiveAdmin in the past on projects where I haven't installed it. It's been there. I have not enjoyed their implementation. The ActiveAdmin side of things. It may well have significantly changed by then, by now, but I remember that not being too fun. Okay, so then these are lots of lovely people working on this. Okay, cool. We're down at the bottom. Cool, and there's Rails conf stuff as well. What would be really, really cool is to see it in action on a project. Here is a demo repository, and is there actually a link to something? Use like to see it? No, okay, but can we go and look? What does this view? What does this actually do? So demo. Oh, okay. It literally just has pull request badge component, issues badge component. So it does some stuff with GitHub, I'm guessing. Issue badge. Okay. That. And look at the actual components then. It's a box component, which is presumably from the documentation, and then issues. There's a badge component RB and a badge component HTML, and in here, passing in the state, creating a okay, and it just reads the state. What does that actually then do? And prime a state. Okay, so it renders another. Oh no, wait. Render primer state component new. Where does primer state component come from? Oh, okay. There's like a whole other. Yeah, okay. Holy shit. So it's not quite like just having everything in the views. This is gonna make these. Where does the octagon actually come in then? Because okay, so all index is actually doing is saying, right, for each of these either render that or that, and then they handle everything else. So then you would go off and look at pull requests, badge component. Okay, so in here, pull requests, badge component, that would tell you that it looks at the state in here and whether it's a draft or not. Name, okay. Wow, okay. I'd love to see Rails apps using, I know that GitHub uses it, but obviously we can't see their code. Using ViewComponent. I'm not sure, just based on how much time we've got, I'm not sure we're going to really be able to delve into the code much today. So this is just a little journey of looking at these together. So here's yet another tutorial on it. Okay, fine. But videos with tutorials in, super useful, I guess. I don't know what I'm searching for here. I'm looking for. There's okay. So someone's working on an equivalent to Storybook for ViewComponent. We mentioned it had those previews earlier. Okay. Is this just a fork of? What's in another run at that logic? Okay. So the thing about ViewComponent is it has GitHub behind it. So ViewComponent Storybook. Okay. So I'm not sure of. Can we look in? Oh, can we just look in GitHub for repos that have the gem in? Is that too stupid? Bear with me, I'm just jumping to the other screen just for a second. Yeah, okay. So okay. Code. But I want like that specific. I don't actually know how good this search is. I'm guessing it's probably not great. Okay, there's a few. Why is there so few? What? That seems a very specific list, because I would assume if it's catching that in one repo, it should be catching it in all. What if I just take the quotes off? There we go. Cool. That's a bit better, Jim. For you. Okay, now I need to find. Okay, this might not be the most. Now I need to find out how many of these are actively being used. Let's go take a look at this one. So is this an active project? No, I think it's just a testing. That is the problem. Sort best matched. Fantasy Euro football. No, okay, I think these are all test projects for people. That's the real one. No, okay, because presumably these are all the really recently indexed one. Once if we jump right back, can I find a more? No, okay, this is a really bad example. Okay, well I'll take a look. I might ask on Twitter or something like that and just look for projects that have this installed then. Let's just we're going to spend the last part of the stream. Let's see if we can get this up and running anyway. So let's do it. So in gem file, add this. Cool, okay. That's running, so we can turn the server off briefly. We can go to our gem file. And put that in. And then we can bundle install. Okay, now I mentioned a generator and installation script, but I think we don't need that initially. So let's just add that in. And we'll say work in progress, install. Plural? No. Install view component gem. Cool. So that's committed, adding to that ever growing work in progress branch. Okay, so let's jump back to our docs. Relation, quick start. Use the component generator to create a new view component. Generate accepts a component name and a list of arguments. Okay, so let's try that. So let's use a real use a real one. So let's say let's call it homepage CTA. And that's gonna have, what do we want it to have? We want it to have, what do you pass? List of a component name and a list of arguments. So why do we need to add content there? Because it says the one it generates then doesn't have content as an argument. So does that mean that it needs content passing in so it can? Okay, let's just do current user. I'm guessing at this kind of what we actually want here. I want to do that one on the homepage, which is say like if there's a logged in user, show this, and if there's not, show something else. Okay, so we have got, it's made some, let's just bump the font size up again. So we've got app components homepage CTA component RB. That's the component itself. It's then created. So these. So how do you actually get it to do that sidecar-y thing? So I would rather have that actually. So let's get rid of those. I'll just do it on the other screen because I've got jig open. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of those. I just wanted to do it in the, what was it called? Sidecar. Generate a component with the sidecar directory. Do it with the sidecar flag. So let's run that same thing again. Like this. So now we get app components homepage CTA, spec components, that's fine, and then app components homepage CTA components. Okay, so let's go take a look at our brand new and fancy components directory. Then we have the component name in here, which is current user. No idea if that's what it's supposed to be. Okay, and so here we want to render one thing. So render equals. So is that conditional rendering as to whether anything should be rendered, or I want the content to be different. So I want a button that sends them in two different ways. So presumably the output that I want is the path and the content. Is that right? So what do I actually want in the template? I want the template to say, here's a link. Oh, can I just use, oh no, I have to use this because I just want to pass it the URL. So this is going to spit out, this is so strange. I don't know any of the syntax. Is that an at? in the template itself. This and in the so no. Let's go to the simpler ones. I just want the simpler example. No, it's just yeah, it's at title. Okay. So that's going to be at CTA path. Will that mess with path helpers? I don't think so. So then we want to close that. And then we want to do at CTA, like the text, I guess. Just going to bump the font size of this up, so hopefully it's as readable as possible. Okay, so okay, and then in the actual homepage view, we want to output this static homepage. We're going to output it here. So we do this and we do render. Homepage.new, and we do current user, which is the argument we asked it to take. And we pass in current user. And if you remember from our devise stream, if the user is signed in, that's either nil if there is no user, or it is the current user that is signed in. So that's a helper that's provided by devise. Let's save that. And we expect that to render something out. It passes in here, current user, spits this out. And so do we then have do we then call a method on here that's render that does that populates those values? I'm a little bit lost. I'm a little bit lost there. So does it do? So my account and the CTA path would be. Can I then? Do I get helpers in here? I can't even remember what the helper for that is. I put it anywhere. Well, let's say it doesn't matter for now. We can just do that, and then else, because we've only got two states for current user. It would be this again, and this one would be sign up if there's no current user. CTA path and CTA text. CTA path, CTA text. We're rendering that there. Right, does that do anything at all? No idea if I've done any of that correctly. Add homepage CTA template here. Okay, so that's this one. Great. Remove that. That is showing up. So we're getting something out of it. But the actual link isn't showing? Or it is, but there's no content in it. It is, but there's no content in it. So CTA path. Do I have to put the accesses on there, I'm guessing? Or am I totally screwing that up? Yeah, I think I'm a bit... Is this ever called? I'm gonna spit out some rubbish. If we do that, does that actually appear in the logs? No, okay, so we never get to render. So presumably if we just put that in the initialize, do we get anything out now? Right, okay, so now we get sign up. So setting these in the initialize works. Why do we not get render? Is that something that's not done every time? Or is it because... Oh, okay, so that's render question issue.